These are the two most important waterways on Earth, and they share a vulnerability that most people have never considered. It isn't terrorism, it isn't mechanical failure, it's wind pushing against stacked metal boxes. This is the story of the Windage constraint, how the simple act of stacking shipping containers higher and higher has created a physics problem so severe that it can shut down 12% of global trade in a single afternoon. To understand why this matters, you first need to understand what windage actually is. Windage area is the total surface area of a vessel exposed to wind. Picture taking a ship, shining a massive spotlight on it from the side, and measuring the shadow it casts on a wall. That shadow is your windage area, and the force generated by wind against that surface doesn't increase in a straight line. It increases proportionally to the square of the wind speed. Double the wind and you quadruple the force. For most of maritime history, this was a manageable problem. Ships sat relatively low in the water, and their hulls were their dominant feature. But container ships changed everything. When you start stacking steel boxes 6, 7, 8, 9 tiers high above the deck, you're essentially building a wall, and that wall moves through some of the most confined waterways on the planet. Take a fully loaded, ultra-large container vessel like the Ever Given. Its lateral surface area, the side profile exposed to crosswinds, runs approximately 16,000 square meters. That's roughly the size of 2.5 football fields standing on end. When a 30-knot wind hits that surface broadside, it generates a lateral force of about 300 metric tons. 300 metric tons of sideways push on a vessel trying to navigate a canal barely wider than the ship itself. And this is where the geometry of global trade creates a trap. The Suez Canal is the single most important artificial waterway in the world, handling around 12% of all global trade. The canal's maximum permissible beam for transiting vessels is 245 feet. But here's a regulation most people don't know about. If your beam exceeds 210 feet, the maximum allowable beam wind drops to just 10 knots. 10 knots. That's a gentle breeze, the kind you'd barely notice walking down the street. But when it's pressing against 16,000 square meters of stacked containers, it becomes a force that can overpower a ship's rudder, its thrusters, and every corrective measure the pilot has available. The Panama Canal operates under its own set of constraints. The Neo-Panamax locks are 1,400 feet long and 180 feet wide, allowing vessels up to 1,200 feet in length and 168 feet of beam. The maximum air draft, the height from the waterline to the highest point on the ship, is capped at 57.91 meters, roughly 190 feet. That ceiling exists for a reason. The higher the containers are stacked, the greater the windage area and the more dangerous a transit becomes. These aren't theoretical concerns, they're learned the hard way concerns. In 1977, the Tokyo Bay, then the largest container vessel in the world at just over 3,000 TEU, lost control and ran aground in the Suez Canal near the 156-kilometer mark. The cause was straightforward, steering difficulties driven by wind forces acting on the vessel's container stacks. After that incident, the ship's owner issued one of the first formal recommendations that vessels should not transit the canal when wind speeds exceed 20 to 25 knots. That was a 3,000 TEU ship. The vessels transiting the Suez Canal today carry more than 24,000 TEU. The Ever Ace, classified as a Suezmax vessel, has a capacity exceeding 24,000 containers. We took the lesson from 1977, and then we built ships 7 times larger and sent them through the same canal. Which brings us to March 23, 2021. The Ever Given, a 20,000-plus TEU container ship, 400 meters long, weighing 224,000 tons, entered the southern section of the Suez Canal. Wind speeds were reported at approximately 30 knots, and a dust storm was reducing visibility. The investigation report later concluded that the root cause of the grounding was a loss of maneuverability, driven by a combination of wind speed, bank suction effects, and the vessel's speed. The squat and bank effect, the changes in wind direction, and hard helm orders all fed directly into that loss of control. But here's where it gets politically interesting. Osama Rabi, chairman of the Suez Canal Authority, publicly pushed back on the idea that wind was the primary factor. He suggested that technical or human errors may have been more to blame, and his reasoning had a clear economic logic to it. If wind is the problem, then the canal has a structural vulnerability, meaning that on any given windy day, the world's most important shipping lane could be shut down. Raby went so far as to state that the Suez Canal has never been closed because of bad weather. The implication was clear: don't blame the canal, blame the crew. The investigation report told a more complicated story. It found that the vessel traffic management system, the Suez Canal Authority pilots, and the ship's captain all failed to adequately assess the risk posed by the weather conditions, including strong winds and reduced visibility. In other words, everyone underestimated what the wind could do to a ship carrying that many stacked containers. The Ever Given sat wedged across the canal for 6 days. During that time, more than 350 vessels queued up waiting to pass. Some ships gave up entirely and rerouted around the Cape of Good Hope, adding thousands of miles and weeks of transit time to their journeys. According to Lloyd's list, each day of blockage disrupted more than $9 billion worth of goods, working out to roughly $400 million per hour. Westbound traffic alone was valued at $5.1 billion daily, and eastbound traffic at $4.5 billion. 6 days. $54 billion in disrupted trade, because the wind pushed against stacked containers. Now, you might think the obvious solution is to simply limit how high containers are stacked on deck. And in certain circumstances, that's exactly what happens. Control systems can be configured to recommend reducing stack heights when high winds are forecast, bringing stacks from 7 high down to 3 high, for example. But there's a catch. Every container you pull from a stack is revenue left on the dock. The entire economic model of modern container shipping is built on maximizing the number of boxes per voyage. Reducing stack height means fewer containers per ship, which means more ships needed, which means higher costs, which means higher prices for everything inside those containers. The windage constraint isn't just a physics problem, it's an economics problem. The engineering of the stacks themselves tells this story perfectly. Below deck, containers sit inside cell guides, vertical steel rails welded into the hold that physically constrain lateral movement. The containers down there don't need to resist sideways forces on their own because the ship's structure does it for them. Above deck, it's a different world entirely. On-deck stacks rely on twist locks and lashing rods, mechanical connections between the containers and the ship's deck fittings to handle wave-induced acceleration loads and wind forces. The higher you stack, the greater the lever arm and the more force those lashing systems have to absorb. This is why containers go overboard. The one Apus learned this lesson in November 2020. Sailing from Yantian, China to Long Beach, California, the vessel encountered gale-force winds and massive swells roughly 1,600 nautical miles northwest of Hawaii. More than 1,800 containers went overboard, carrying cargo worth an estimated $200 million. And the one Apus isn't an anomaly. Over the past 16 years, the World Shipping Council has tracked an average of roughly 1,500 containers lost at sea annually. More than 20,000 containers have tumbled overboard in the last decade and a half, and each one represents the same fundamental tension. We stacked them higher than the wind and waves would tolerate. The Panama Canal faces its own version of this constraint, compounded by a crisis that has nothing to do with wind, but everything to do with how we respond to it. Starting in mid-2023, a severe drought driven by El Nino caused water levels in Gatun Lake, the artificial reservoir that feeds the canal's lock system, to plummet. By January 1st, 2024, water levels had dropped lower than any January on record, nearly 6 feet below the previous year. The Panama Canal Authority was forced to slash daily transits from the normal 36 to 38 vessels down to just 18 per day by February 2024. When draft restrictions tighten, ships can't load as deeply. When ships can't load as deeply, they compensate by stacking more containers above the waterline, which increases windage, which increases risk. The constraints compound each other. Consider the Evermax, which on August 1st, 2023, became the largest capacity container ship to ever transit the Panama Canal. It couldn't make the transit fully loaded. The vessel had to offload 1,400 TEU in Balboa for transshipment across the isthmus by train before passing through the locks. The canal's draft restrictions literally forced the ship to leave cargo behind. The United States, the largest user of the Panama Canal, has roughly 73% of its export and import containers passing through this waterway, with 40% of all U.S. container traffic flowing through those locks. That's roughly $270 billion in cargo annually, and every restriction, every limitation ripples through the American economy. To address the water crisis, Panama's government approved a $1.6 billion project, the Rio Indio Dam and Tunnel, designed to expand Gatun Lake's watershed. The Panama Canal Authority has also begun advancing a land bridge and interoceanic natural gas pipeline linking the Atlantic and Pacific coasts, hedging against future disruptions. But they expect another El Niño-driven drought within the next 4 years. Back in the Suez, the response to the windage problem has been institutional rather than structural. Starting May 1st, 2024, mooring service in the canal shifted to a shore-based model, with only 30% of ships in convoy receiving onboard mooring service. The ships selected for that onboard service are chosen based on their windage area, gross tonnage, draft, and other criteria. In other words, the Suez Canal Authority now formally triages vessels based on how much wind they catch, and the ships keep getting bigger. As far back as the mid-2000s, when the ultra-large container vessel concept was still emerging, experts were already sounding alarms. In 2006, the World Maritime University published a paper concluding that ultra-large container vessels might become the most common design in the future, but that sizes above 15,000 TEU seem to be extreme solutions with extreme risks as well. That was nearly 20 years ago. Today's largest vessels carry 24,000 TEU and counting. The European Journal of Science, Innovation and Technology put it plainly in 2023. The increased container capacity comes by way of additional breadth, height, and depth, but the broader, higher, and deeper she is, the more challenging and accident-prone handling becomes for pilots and ship handlers. There's also a human dimension that rarely gets discussed. Port pilots, the specialized navigators who guide ships through canals and harbors, are struggling to keep up. The arrival of ultra-large container vessels has opened a training gap, with certain port pilots currently lacking the specialized expertise required to safely and efficiently handle these ships. We've built vessels that are pushing the boundaries of what human skill can manage in confined waters, and we haven't invested proportionally in the people doing the managing. So where does this leave us? We have two canals that collectively handle a staggering share of global commerce. We have ships that keep getting larger, stacking containers higher, presenting ever greater windage areas to the atmosphere. We have weather patterns growing more unpredictable and water resources growing less reliable. And we have an economic model that incentivizes maximizing every cubic meter of cargo space, pushing stack heights to whatever the lashing systems and structural limits will technically allow. The windage constraint is ultimately a story about the collision between optimization and physics. For decades, the shipping industry has optimized for cost per container, using larger ships, higher stacks, and more boxes per voyage. And it has worked spectacularly well, driving down the cost of transporting goods to a fraction of a penny per item. But physics doesn't negotiate. Wind doesn't care about your profit margins. And a canal is a canal. It doesn't get wider because your ship got bigger. The Ever Given sat sideways in the Suez Canal for 6 days, and the world watched in a mixture of horror and dark comedy as a single ship held 12% of global trade hostage. What most people didn't realize is that it wasn't really about one ship or one crew or one bad day. It was about a system engineered to the absolute edge of its tolerances, where a 30-knot wind, an unremarkable wind by any standard, was enough to push everything past the breaking point. The containers keep stacking higher, the ships keep getting bigger, the canals stay the same width, and the wind keeps blowing. Something eventually has to give.